Greetings once again, Delvers, and welcome back to the Vaults for Bastard. Today's episode is going to continue talking about basic training in Pathfinder. I'm going through the 14 or so basic actions you can take in Pathfinder with any character, and whenever it's your turn, or if it's a reaction, you could take it when it's not your turn. And then maybe I'll even get into the 10 so-called specialty basic actions, because Pathfinder's got lots of actions for you to choose from, and that's what this series is about. What are these actions? How do you use them? How would you adjudicate them if you're a GM? Any potential strategies or ideas for using them? Or questions that I'm not even sure I have the answers to yet. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to continue where I left off, and we are talking about escape, the escape action. This guy is an attack. So keep that in mind because that is going to potentially trigger your multiple attack penalty. And if you don't know about Pathfinder, you've got these 3 actions on your turn. You can spend all 3 of them making attacks. However, each subsequent attack after the first one has a penalty known as the multiple attack penalty, or MAP, M-A-P. And the first one is typically -5, and then the second extra attack is -10. So your first attack is whatever your normal bonus is. You attack again, you have a -5 penalty. You attack again, you got a -10 penalty. Anyway, escape. It's an attack. It's an action. Therefore, if you try to follow it up with other attacks, or you try to attack before that, this could be penalized. This could cause your other attacks to be penalized. It just depends on what your order of operations is. So what does the escape action do? Well, it's self-explanatory, I hope. You attempt to escape, and you're trying to escape from one of these 3 conditions. There is the grabbed condition, the immobilize condition, or the restrain condition. And I imagine there are other non-specific conditions that you could apply this to. But anyway, there you go. Those are the 3 conditions. You can only choose 1 creature, 1 object, 1 spell effect, 1 hazard, or 1 other impediment that's imposing these conditions in order to escape from it. So if you are grabbed by multiple zombies bringing you down into the horde as they're trying to eat your legs, you can only attempt to escape from one of them with one of these actions. You go ahead and attempt to check using your unarmed attack modifier. That's going to become important in a second. Against the DC of the effect. So unarmed attacks would be what they sound like, a punch, a kick, something like that. So you're trying to break free, whatever the DC of the effect is. The DC depends on what it is that has you grabbed, immobilized, restrained. Sometimes it's an athletics DC if somebody's just like grabbing you and they're using their muscles to hold you in place. It could be a thievery DC if somebody has tied you up with, binds, chains, something of that nature. It could be the spell DC if it's some sort of magical spell that has you held in place. Or it could be the escape DC, which you'd find with hazards, objects, traps, that sort of thing. Any of those sort of object, non-people type of grabbing devices, they typically come with an escape DC. You go ahead and can make this unarmed attack to break free, or it also says here that you can attempt an acrobatics or athletics check. So if you have good acrobatics, good athletics, you can attempt to wiggle your way out or break your way free. I think probably which one you choose would depend on the circumstances, and I would say that most GMs would probably limit you just depending on what your situation is. Depends on what you're being held by. Like, can you wiggle out of leg cuffs? I don't know, is acrobatics appropriate there? Athletics, is that going to be appropriate in every possible scenario? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. That's up to the GM, right? So anyway, you can use the unarmed attack, acrobatics, athletics. But regardless of what you choose, if you're taking the escape action, it counts as an attack. Now, you go ahead and you roll against the DC that has you restrained. And then it's got variable degrees of success, like many things in Pathfinder. So if you roll 10 higher than the DC that you needed, you get a critical success. So you get to break free. And it says that you can stride which is moving. That's the basic movement action up to 5 feet. So you get loose of the grabbed, immobilized, restrained condition by one of the targets you chose, by the way. So if you're restrained by multiple targets, you're only breaking loose of one of them. It's not all of them. You then stride 5 feet. You can stride 5 feet. You don't have to. That's going to become important in a second because there's something I have a question about. Success is you just break free of one of those things that's got you. And then failure, of course, you don't break free. And then critical failure, if you roll 10 or lower than the number you needed, you don't get free, and you can't attempt any more escapes until your next turn. Because you can escape up to 3 things on your turns. You have 3 actions, so you could escape, escape, escape. Again, though, you're going to hit that multiple attack penalty. So that is the basic action, escape. But as I'm sure you can imagine, there's some questions here. There's some things that you might have to adjudicate as a GM or think about as a player. So let's go ahead and take a look. So from the trying to figure out what this stuff is, I went ahead and pulled out the 3 conditions to which you are able to apply this escape action. Grabbed, immobilized, restrained. What are they? What do they mean? And what else should we know about them? So the grabbed condition says you're held in place by another creature, giving you the off guard and immobilized condition. So if you are grabbed, you're also immobilized. We're going to look at that one. And you're off guard. So I brought that rule out here too. So off guard says you're distracted. Otherwise, you're unable to focus your full attention. You take a -2 circumstance penalty to your AC. So that is the big problem here. So if you're grabbed, you have a -2 on your AC. And you're immobilized. So we'll get to immobilized in a second. If you attempt a manipulate action while you're grabbed, you have to make a DC 5 flat check to even do that. So manipulate might be, I'm trying to grab a potion to drink it. That's manipulate. I believe it has that manipulate trait. And you'll know because anything that is a manipulate will say it in the that reddish, brownish color right underneath that little box there, right underneath the word escape. So it says attack. If it has the manipulate trait, you can't do it unless you roll a DC 5 flat check, which is fairly easy. You roll a flat check means you roll a D20, and you got to hit that number or higher. So if you hit a 5 or better, you're able to use your manipulate. But if you roll 1, 2, 3, 4, you can't do the manipulate, and you lose that action. All right, so we're grabbed. We want to manipulate something, but we're going to have a harder time. We need to roll DC 5. We're off guard, so our AC is -2. And we're immobilized. What does immobilized say? It says you are incapable of movement. So you can't use any actions that have the move trait. So now that's another problem. We're grabbed, which means we're immobilized, which means we're off guard. Off guard means we have a -2 AC. Grabbed means we have trouble with the manipulate action. Grabbed means immobilized. Immobilized means you can't use the move trait. If you're immobilized by something holding you in place with an external force would move you out of your space, the force must succeed at a check against either the DC of the effect holding you in place or the relevant defense, which is usually the fortitude DC of the monster holding you in place. Now this part confused me a little bit. So I'm immobilized. If I want to break loose, I need to use the escape action, which doesn't sound like what's being described here. What it says here is if you're immobilized by something that holds you in place and an external force, so maybe an ally trying to get you loose, they have to succeed at a check against the DC of the effect, which is usually their fortitude. So I'm guessing they might be able to, I don't know if it would be an escape. Again, I'm going to kind of get to this in a second. Would that be... That's kind of where I have my 4th bullet point here. Spoiler, can an ally make the escape attempt? So that's the one thing I'm looking at here for immobilize, the second part here. So if I'm immobilized, one of my allies wants to help me, do they need to take the escape action? Or is there something else they can do? Athletics? I don't know. Well, escape could be athletics, could be acrobatics, but they couldn't acrobatics me out of immobilized, right? What do they, wiggle me loose? That doesn't make sense. So there's some adjudicating is going to need to be happening here. I'm not exactly sure how an ally, what check or whatever they would use here. I get the idea of the fortitude DC, but it doesn't really specify, at least in the context of escape. All right, restrained is the last one. Restrained says you're tied up, you can barely move, or a creature has you pinned. you have the off guard condition here, so that still is going to be the same as grabbed, and you're immobilized just like grabbed, and you can't use any attack or manipulate actions except for escape or force open your bonds. So restrained, yeah, restrained is worse than grabbed. It's basically grabbed, plus you can't attack, and you can't manipulate at all. That's pretty bad. So with grabbed, you can manipulate if you roll the 5 or better. With restrained, you can't manipulate. And you can't attack at all with restrained. So you could, like, if I'm grabbed, you could stab the dude that's grabbing you if you wanted to, or club him over the head. You can make attack rolls. But if you're restrained, you can't. The only thing you could do is attempt to escape or force open the bonds. That sounds pretty bad to me. Okay, then a couple other little things I just want to, confirm here. So escape, you have 3 options. You can use an unarmed attack, which I'm going to talk more about in a second. You can use acrobatics or athletics. So if you are trained in those skills, acrobatics, athletics, it might make sense for you to go ahead and use those. However, if you're not trained in those 2, then you're probably going to go with the unarmed attack. And I believe almost everybody has training in unarmed attacks. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But anyway, unarmed attack, that's going to use your training modifier, so +2. It's going to use your level, whatever that is, +1, +2, +3. And if it's an attack, I'm guessing it's going to use your strength, so you might have even more. So depending on what your character is, your class, unarmed attack might be your best option here. Might be. And there's one other reason I think it might be your best option over acrobatics and athletics, if I'm reading something right in a second about unarmed attacks. All right, so then you're going to make one of these checks. You're going to go against the athletics DC if you're being grappled by somebody grabbing you, whatever. Thievery DC if somebody's tied you up, they've bound you. Spell DC if they've cast some sort of spell on you. Escape DC if it's some sort of, object or trap or whatever impediment. And then the only other thing I'm looking down here in the immobilize condition, it talks about if somebody else could push you out of that space, they would go against the fortitude DC. So if that is a form of escape by proxy, then maybe the fortitude DC is something else you could have listed over here. But again, I don't know if that technically would be an escape action. Because if it is, then the map would apply to your ally as well. If it's not, that might make sense to stay immobilized and your ally just makes, a push with athletics or something like that, which maybe is not going to get the map penalty. I don't know. I don't know if that's a way to cheat this or not. All right, then the other thing that I was looking at that was interesting, when it says that, go back to the description, the critical success on the escape action, the last line says you can then stride up to 5 feet. I'm assuming because it's the stride action and not the step action. We'll get to that in a later basic training. But striding, moving, can trigger reactive strikes, aka attacks of opportunity. So if the creature, whatever that has you grabbed, let's say, you escape critical success and then stride away 5 feet, and it has a reactive strike, it can whale you again as its reaction. And what if that also has the grabbed trait attached to it? That would suck. So that stride there and the critical success may not be very exciting or worth risking. I don't know. And you're only stepping 5 feet away, so even if you get or stride 5 feet away, it's not like you got away. The thing can just hit you the next turn probably anyway. I mean, if it has reach with 10 feet for sure. I don't know. Interesting. And then, like I said, I already asked the question about the ally. Exactly. Now here's, aside from the immobilized condition, let's say I'm, bound. Can my ally come up and use escape action to, get me out of the binds or get me out of the grab condition, pull me free, or pull the thing's arms off me? Would that be an escape action, or is there a different action you're supposed to use with that? I don't know. I haven't, looked ahead at all the other actions. Maybe there's a different one. So I'm just kind of chalking that up to I'm not sure the answer. Again, maybe you know the answer, dear viewer, and if you do, go ahead and put that down in the comment section. All right, the last thing I wanted to talk about with this action, escape, was this idea of the unarmed attacks and why I'm thinking this might be your best option to break free of one of these things. So if I go back here again, it says you can choose the creature, let's say that's got you, and attempt a check using your unarmed attack modifier. Now, does that mean you're just using the unarmed attack modifier to make the escape action? Or are you actually making an unarmed attack? I'm thinking the way it's worded that you're not actually making an unarmed attack. You're just using your unarmed attack modifier. However, that still begs the question, even if it doesn't deal the damage, the unarmed attack has the, what is it, the agile trait. And if you look at the multiple attack penalty table, this is where your first attack has no penalty, but your second has the -5, the third or more has -10. But notice in the agile trait over here, if you're using an agile weapon, which unarmed attacks would fall under, the penalty is only -4, -8. So that's my other question. If I'm allowed to make an unarmed attack to get loose, does it deal damage? Like, I might punch this thing in the face to break free, which would deal damage, or am I just trying to unarmed attack, pull myself loose? Which, isn't that just athletics then? Like, what's the difference? I'm trying to figure out if you're saying I can use my unarmed attack modifier, that sounds like I can fight my way free, whereas athletics is I'm just pulling myself loose. So if you're saying that the the unarmed attack modifier is just you shoving away, well, what's the difference between that and athletics other than the stat I'm using? So anyway, I don't know, maybe that is just descriptively the same thing and you pick whichever one's the best. Okay, great. I'm not dealing the damage. I guess I can live with that. But do I get to apply the agile trait to this unarmed modifier? So it says attempt a check using your unarmed attack modifier. So again, does that apply this lesser penalty if I'm trying to escape? Let's say I'm grappled multiple times or grabbed multiple times, and I'm trying to break free of multiple enemies. Am I going to get the lesser penalty down here? I mean, I kind of feel like you should, right? Like, I mean, you're unarmed attacks. This is what you're trying to do. So maybe that would be lesser penalized. At least that's the way I would rule it, that it's an agile property. So why not use it? Anyway, just throwing it out there. I also could see where the damage might apply. Like I'm throwing an elbow in the face of the thing that's got me, or I'm like slamming on its arms to break free, or bending a finger, snapping, breaking a finger to get loose. I would also consider kicking. What about biting? Because they mentioned a couple other things in here in the unarmed attacks paragraph or section I pulled out here. So it says the unarmed attacks table lists the statistics of the unarmed attacks, blah, blah, blah. Certain ancestry feats, class feature spells give access to special, more powerful unarmed attacks. I don't know if any of those would apply here, or it's just that bonus only. But it does talk about goblins being able to bite with razor tooth. It says, well, most unarmed attacks are melee, but it does say certain ancestors, like the Leshy, have the ability to make ranged unarmed attacks. So I don't know if that's the case, if you kind of put this together, then could a Leshy with a ranged unarmed attack modifier act as an ally, for example, in my last bullet here, and make an escape attempt for you from range? That sounds like a no. At least that's the way I would rule it. Like, no. It kind of depends, I guess, on what the scenario is. But the Leshy shooting seed pods at somebody to break you free, that sounds more like you're attacking and trying to distract them, not you're trying to do escape. But I don't know. If the Leshy is kind of being held and I don't know, the grapple or the grabbed, or is this going to help? Can it use the ranged? Because that would apply its dexterity modifier. So maybe dexterity is a higher stat for that. Because the unarmed attack typically would be, I think, calculated using your melee and your strength. But I don't know. I'd have to look at the Leshy specifically. It says, if it doesn't say that the Leshy's unarmed attack is the ranged seed pod. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Anyway, there's some, some questions there. So again, we have one of these basic actions, basic rules that I'm seeing some potential questions about. It's also pretty complicated when you start to add up all this stuff, right? Because you have this domino chaining of grab, immobilize, restrain, the off guard. You got the I can use unarmed attack, acrobatics, athletics, and I can go against the athletics, the thievery, the spell DC, the escape DC, maybe the fortitude DC. And you throw in here, well, maybe it's an unarmed attack that can deal damage. And maybe it's an unarmed attack that doesn't deal damage, but it's the agile trait. And then is there the ability of the range Leshy? Does that apply? Does biting count? Does kicking count for escapes? I think there's a lot of potential gray area here. I don't think it's as clear cut as this initially seems. So I keep finding that I think, folks, is that I'm looking at these basic actions and I'm coming up with some questions as I do it. All right, well, there you go. Hopefully that was some more useful information for you. Hopefully you got something out of it. If so, like the vid, subscribe to the channel, post your comments if you know anything about the escape action that I missed, or you can clarify some of my questions for me, or point me in the direction of some other rules that, explain this better, or, say that I'm completely wrong. I don't know. Let me know. Anyway, have yourselves a good night. Take care, and I will see you in the next video.